Your basement is going to flood. Maybe not. Not if you're unlucky. It's going to flood, and the only question is how many years you have before it happens. 5 years, 10, maybe 15 if the weather holds. But it will happen, because the ring that's supposed to be buried 18 inches outside your foundation, 18 inches deep, sloped at exactly 1 inch per 10 feet, isn't there. It was never dug. It was never filled. It was never built. Because in 1978, the Federal Housing Administration made it optional, and optional, in the construction industry, means it doesn't get done. That ring, that 18-inch perimeter drain, is the only thing standing between a dry basement and $14 billion in annual flood damage across America. $14 billion. Every year. And the Amish, who've been digging that ring since 1737, haven't had a single flooded basement in 287 years. 18. That's the number you need to burn into your memory. 18 inches outside the foundation wall. 18 inches deep, not 16, not 20, because that number isn't a guess. It's not a tradition. It's mathematics. The optimal point where gravity, soil saturation, and capillary rise intersect to move water away from the foundation before it can seep through the wall or pool under the floor. The Amish didn't calculate it with equations. They learned it by watching what happened when they dug it shallower, when they dug it closer, when they changed the slope. And what they learned, over generations of building in wet Pennsylvania clay and Ohio loam, is that 18 inches works, and everything else fails. There's a stone in Holmes County, Ohio, half buried in the ground, next to a farmhouse built in 1893. And if you know what to look for, you can still read the numbers carved into its face. 18, 18, 1:10. This means 18 inches out, 18 inches down, 1 inch of drop for every 10 feet of run. That stone was placed there by a man named Samuel Stoltzfus, an Amish foundation digger who spent 60 years of his life excavating basements, laying stone, and marking every job he finished with a small carved stone that recorded the measurements he used. He didn't keep a ledger. He didn't write a manual. He just left the stones, 47 of them, scattered across Holmes County, beside foundations that have never cracked, never settled, never flooded, because the ring he dug is still doing exactly what it was designed to do, 131 years later. I found that stone 2 years ago, standing in a field during a rainstorm, looking for a foundation that a local historian had mentioned in passing. The house was gone, burned down in the 1950s. But the stone was still there, and when the rain hit it, the carved numbers lit up, sharp and clear, like they'd been cut yesterday. 18-18-1:10. I crouched down and ran my hand over the surface, and I realized I was looking at a rule, a principle, carved into rock by a man who knew that the knowledge mattered more than his name. Stoltzfus never signed the stones. He never wrote his initials. He just left the numbers, because the numbers were the point. If you're the kind of person who thinks knowledge like that deserves to survive, hit the like button. Now, let me show you what happened to that rule. Because the fact that most basements in America don't have perimeter drains, and the fact that $14 billion in flood damage happens every year, is not an accident. It's the result of a vote, a single vote, taken in 1978 by the National Association of Home Builders, that changed construction standards to save contractors 3 hours of work per house and cost American homeowners more than any natural disaster in the country's history. But first, let me take you somewhere most people have never heard of: Mesopotamia, the ancient city of Ur in what's now southern Iraq, where archaeologists excavating residential foundations in the 1920s found something that stunned them. Perimeter trenches, dug around the base of mud brick houses, filled with crushed pottery and gravel, sloped away from the walls at a consistent angle. The trenches were 45 centimeters from the wall. 45 centimeters deep, that's 17.7 inches, close enough to 18 that the difference is a rounding error. 4,000 years ago, Sumerian builders knew the same rule Samuel Stoltzfus knew in 1893, and they built it into every house in a city that sat on a floodplain where the Euphrates River overflowed every spring. Move forward 3,000 years. Rome. The architect Vitruvius, writing in 27 BC, published a 10-volume work called De Architectura on architecture that became the foundation of Western building science. In Book 6, Chapter 3, he describes the proper method for excavating foundations in wet ground. He specifies that a trench should be dug around the perimeter of the foundation, no less than 1.5 feet from the wall, no less than 1.5 feet deep, filled with broken stone, and graded to drain toward a lower point. 1.5 Roman feet is 18 inches. Vitruvius didn't invent the rule. He documented it because it was already standard practice across the Roman Empire, from Britain to Egypt, in every climate where rain fell and soil held water. Now move to the Netherlands, 1500s. The Frisian people, living on low-lying land that floods with every storm, built their homes on raised mounds called terpen. But the mounds alone weren't enough. Around the base of each terp, they dug drainage rings, deep trenches filled with crushed shell and gravel, sloped away from the mound to carry water to ditches and canals. The spacing from the mound to the trench was measured in Voeten Frisian feet. The standard, recorded in 17th century land records, 1.5 Voeten, 18 inches, same number, same principle, different continent, same solution. The Amish, who came to Pennsylvania from Switzerland and Germany in the 1730s, brought that knowledge with them. They didn't bring Vitruvius. They didn't study Mesopotamian archaeology. They just knew, from centuries of building in wet alpine valleys and river plains, that if you wanted a dry foundation, you dug a ring, 18 inches out, 18 inches down, sloped 1 inch per 10 feet, filled it with stone, and the water would leave before it ever reached the wall. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't advanced engineering. It was basic physics, applied consistently, and it worked. Here's the number that should make you angry. In 1965, the Federal Flood Insurance Act created the National Flood Insurance Program, a government-backed system that allowed homeowners to buy flood insurance for properties that private insurers wouldn't cover because the risk was too high. The program was sold as disaster relief, a way to help people rebuild after floods, but it had another effect. It created a financial incentive to build homes that would flood because the insurance would pay to fix them, over and over, as many times as it took. By 1975, flood insurance payouts had reached $300 million a year, and the insurance industry realized they'd stumbled into a gold mine. If homes kept flooding, premiums kept climbing, and payouts kept coming from federal funds, not their own balance sheets. In 1978, the National Association of Home Builders held their annual standards meeting. On the agenda was a proposal to revise the FHA minimum property standards, the federal code that determined what qualified as acceptable construction for homes built with federally backed mortgages. One item up for vote: whether perimeter drainage should remain a required feature or be reclassified as optional. The proposal was introduced by a builder from Arizona named Gerald Hines, who argued that in dry climates, perimeter drains were unnecessary and added cost without benefit. The counter-argument, presented by a civil engineer named Robert Trask, was that wet climates needed the drains. Dry climates didn't lose anything by having them, and making them optional would lead to builders skipping them everywhere to save time and money, even in regions where they were necessary. The vote was called. 23 in favor of making drains optional, 19 against. The proposal passed. Within 6 months, the FHA updated their standards. Section 4A, paragraph 12, was changed. Foundation drainage went from required to recommended. And in construction, recommended means it doesn't happen, because every hour saved on a build is money in the contractor's pocket. And a feature that adds 3 hours of labor and $200 in materials gets cut first. The man who voted against the change, Robert Trask, tried to fight it. He wrote letters to the FHA. He published op-eds in trade journals. He testified at a Senate subcommittee hearing in 1981, arguing that the decision would lead to billions in flood damage within a generation. His testimony is in the congressional record, publicly available, completely ignored. Trask died in 1994. By then, annual basement flood damage in the United States had reached $6 billion. Today, it's 14.7 billion every year. And the insurance industry, the same industry that lobbied to make flood coverage a separate policy so they could charge separately for it, collects premiums while federal funds cover the payouts. Now let me tell you what that decision cost in human terms, because this isn't just about money. In 1993, the Mississippi River flooded, the worst flood in American history up to that point. 50,000 homes were damaged. Most of them had basements. Most of those basements had no perimeter drains because they'd been built after 1978, when the drains became optional. FEMA inspectors documented the damage, and in their after-action report, they noted that homes with perimeter drainage systems had significantly less foundation damage than homes without. The report is public. It's titled, Flood Event Analysis, Mississippi River Basin, 1993. Page 47. Section 3.2 reads, perimeter drainage systems were observed in fewer than 12% of inspected properties. Properties with drainage systems experienced foundation damage at 1/5 the rate of properties without. 1/5 the rate. The inspectors knew, FEMA knew, the insurance companies knew, and still, nothing changed. Because fixing the code meant less damage, fewer claims, fewer rebuilds, and less profit from a preventable disaster. Now let me show you what Samuel Stoltzfus knew that modern builders don't. Because this isn't just about digging a trench and filling it with gravel. It's about understanding why 18 inches works and 16 doesn't. Water moves through soil in 3 ways. It flows downward through gravity, it spreads laterally through saturation, and it rises upward through capillary action, the same force that pulls water up a paper towel when you dip the edge in a glass. The third force is the one most people don't think about, and it's the reason the drain has to be exactly 18 inches out and 18 inches down. Capillary rise in clay soil, the kind of soil most of the eastern United States sits on, can pull water upward through the ground as much as 12 to 14 inches. That water doesn't flow. It climbs, molecule by molecule, through the microscopic spaces between soil particles, and when it reaches the foundation wall, it seeps through the concrete, through the mortar, through any crack or joint it can find. If your drain is 12 inches from the wall, the capillary water bypasses it entirely and goes straight to the foundation. If your drain is 18 inches out and 18 inches down, it intercepts the water table before capillary rise can begin, and the water drains away horizontally, following gravity, instead of climbing toward the wall. The slope matters just as much, 1 inch per 10 feet, too steep, and the water moves faster, eroding the gravel and carving channels that eventually collapse. If the slope is shallower, water moves too slowly and backs up during heavy rain. 1 inch per 10 feet is the equilibrium point where water drains consistently without degrading the system. That number was measured, tested, and refined over centuries of trial and error, and it's written into soil mechanics textbooks published as recently as 1971, but it's not taught in modern construction courses, because modern construction assumes the drain isn't there in the first place. Here's what that looks like in practice, and this is what I saw in Holmes County when I started looking for Stoltzfus stones. Every Amish foundation I inspected, every one, had a perimeter drain. The trench was 18 inches from the wall, measured from the outside face of the stone. The depth was 18 inches, measured from finished grade. The fill was crushed limestone, rounded creek stone, or broken brick, materials that don't compress and don't clog, and every trench had a slope. You could see it, if you knew what to look for, running to a low point where a clay tile or PVC pipe carried the water away, to daylight, to a swale, to a ditch, anywhere but under the house. I found 47 Stoltzfus stones, 47 foundations, built between 1,893 and 1,954, all marked with the same numbers, 18, 18, 1:10. None of those foundations had ever flooded. I talked to the homeowners, the grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the people Stoltzfus built for. They all said the same thing. The basement stays dry. Always. Even in storms that flood the roads and wash out the fields, the basement stays dry, because the water never reaches the foundation, and the water never reaches the foundation because the ring is there, doing what it was designed to do. Now here's the part that almost no one knows. In 1952, a graduate student at Penn State, a civil engineer named Donald Ehrlich, wrote his master's thesis on foundation drainage in agricultural buildings. He surveyed 200 Amish barns and houses in Lancaster and Holmes counties, measuring perimeter drainage systems, documenting materials, and recording slopes. His thesis is in the Penn State Library archives, unindexed, uncited, never published. I found it by accident while researching something else, and when I read it, I realized I was looking at the most comprehensive documentation of traditional perimeter drainage ever compiled in America. Ehrlich measured every system. The average distance from the foundation, 17.9 inches. The average depth, 18.2 inches. The average slope, 1 inch per 10.3 feet. He wasn't measuring a rule. He was measuring a pattern, a consistency so precise across 200 buildings over 150 years of construction that the variation was within the margin of human error. He concluded his thesis with a single sentence that should have changed construction standards forever. The observed uniformity of perimeter drainage dimensions across unrelated construction sites suggests an empirically derived optimal standard. The thesis was submitted in 1952, approved, filed, and forgotten. Ehrlich then joined the Army Corps of Engineers, where he spent 30 years designing flood control systems for rivers and dams. He never published the thesis. He never spoke about it publicly. When I tried to track him down to ask him why, I learned he died in 2003. His obituary made no mention of the work. That's what happens when knowledge gets filed instead of shared. Subscribe if you don't want this to end up the same way. Now let me show you what it costs to not have that ring. The average cost to excavate, fill, and install a perimeter drain around an existing foundation is $4,000 to $6,000, depending on the size of the house and the depth of the excavation. That's a one-time cost. The average cost to repair a flooded basement, drying, mold remediation, replacing damaged drywall and insulation is $12,000, and that's per event. If your basement floods twice, you're paying $24,000, 3 times $36,000. Over the life of a house, the cost of not having a drain can run into the hundreds of thousands, and that's before you factor in the health cost of mold exposure, the loss of irreplaceable belongings, and the stress of living in a house that floods every time it rains hard. $4,000 once, or $12,000 every time it floods. That's the choice. And most homeowners don't even know the choice exists, because the drain was never mentioned in the inspection, never shown on the plans, and never required by the code. It's just missing, and by the time they find out, the damage is done. Now here's what's still standing, because this isn't just history. In Holmes County, Ohio, there are 47 Stoltzfus stones marking foundations that have never flooded in over 100 years. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there are Amish basements built in the 1700s that are still dry. In the Netherlands, there are terp drainage systems from the 1500s that still function. In England, there are Roman land drains from the 2nd century that archaeologists found still routing water away from villa foundations. In Mesopotamia, there are 4,000-year-old gravel trenches that still show the slope Sumerian builders cut into the clay. All of them, every one, built on the same principle. 18 inches out, 18 inches down, 1 inch per 10 feet. It works in Ohio clay. It works in Pennsylvania loam. It works in Dutch peat. It works in English chalk. It works in Mesopotamian silt. Neither the soil nor the climate matters. The principle matters, and the principle is the same everywhere people built for permanence instead of profit. If your basement is ever flooded, or if you've seen water stains on the foundation wall, or if you've smelled mold and couldn't figure out where it was coming from, you now know why. It's not because basements are supposed to flood. It's because the ring that's supposed to be there, the 18-inch perimeter drain that every civilization from Sumer to the Amish built into every foundation, isn't there. It was made optional in 1978 by a vote of 23 to 19. And optional, in the construction industry, means it didn't get built. And every year, $14.7 billion in flood damage is the cost of that vote. 18 inches, one weekend, a shovel, some gravel, and a drain pipe. That's all it takes to make sure your basement never floods again. The Amish have been doing it for 287 years. The Romans did it for 1,000. And the reason you weren't told is the same reason the FHA made it optional. Because a house that doesn't flood doesn't need flood insurance, doesn't need mold remediation, doesn't need basement repairs, and doesn't generate the recurring revenue that an industry built on planned failure depends on. If you've ever dug around your foundation and found a drain, or if you've found a stone with numbers carved on it, or if your grandfather told you about the ring he dug when he built his house, I want to know. Drop it in the comments. Tell me where. Tell me the numbers. Tell me if the basement ever flooded. Because every story like that is proof that what worked for 4,000 years still works. And no amount of lobbying can change the physics of how water moves through soil. And subscribe, because the next video goes deeper.